Have you ever noticed how the person who seems the least desperate for attention often ends up commanding the most of it, not the loudest voice in the room, not the one constantly explaining, proving, chasing, but the one who stays calm, distant, unreadable? While everyone else fights to be noticed, he becomes the one people watch. This isn't coincidence. It's a psychological law most people never learn, because the moment others sense that you need their approval, their validation, their affection, the balance of power quietly shifts. They stop respecting you, and they start managing you. But remove the need and something strange happens. Suddenly, people lean closer. They analyze your silence. They try to earn reactions you no longer give away. In a world addicted to attention, the person who withholds it becomes magnetic. In this video, I will show you why emotional distance creates fascination, how silence rewires power dynamics, and how detachment turns you from the pursuer into the prize. If you want to understand the psychology, most people never see subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to learn changes how people respond to you forever. Now let's break down why detachment makes you irresistible. Why do people start paying attention the moment you stop asking for it? Look closely at most social interactions, and you will notice a quiet pattern. People spend enormous energy trying to be understood. They explain their intentions. They justify their choices. They soften their words so no one feels uncomfortable. On the surface, it looks like openness. In reality, it is negotiation for approval, and approval is leverage. The moment someone senses that you need their validation, the dynamic changes. They may still smile. They may still listen. But somewhere in the background, the balance of power has shifted. You are no longer the one choosing. You are the one hoping to be chosen. Human psychology reacts to this instantly. What is eager becomes less valuable. What is uncertain becomes intriguing. This is why the person who explains everything often fades into the background, while the one who holds something back becomes the center of attention. Detachment disrupts this invisible economy. When you stop offering your emotions on demand, curiosity replaces certainty. People begin to study you instead of managing you. They look for signals. They try to read your reactions, and the less predictable those reactions become, the more psychological space you occupy in their minds. Think about a simple moment most people have experienced. Someone criticizes your decision in a meeting. The common response is immediate. No, that's not what I meant. Let me explain my reasoning. You lean forward. You clarify. You defend the logic. But the disciplined response is different. You pause. You listen. You say nothing for a moment longer than people expect. Then, calmly. That's an interesting perspective. No rush. No emotional correction. The room shifts. Suddenly, the pressure is no longer on you to justify yourself. It moves back to the person who spoke. Because when you refuse to react on command, you remove the mechanism people use to guide you. Most individuals are predictable because their emotions are predictable. A jab triggers anger. A compliment triggers eagerness. A misunderstanding triggers explanation. Once those buttons are visible, anyone can press them. Detachment removes the buttons. This is not coldness, it is restraint. It is the discipline of choosing when your inner world becomes visible and when it remains protected. The detached person still observes everything, but observation replaces confession. And when you stop narrating yourself to the world starts trying to figure you out. Mystery in social dynamics is not an accident. It's a form of power. And the moment you understand this, something important begins to change. Because detachment is not about withdrawing from people. It's about withdrawing your need to be managed by them. And that realization leads to the next rule most people never see. Why does silence make people uneasy? Because most interactions run on a hidden contract. One person pushes, the other reacts. One person probes, the other explains. This rhythm is so common that people stop noticing it. They assume every statement deserves a reply, every accusation deserves a defense, every silence must be filled. But this rhythm is not neutral. It is a mechanism of control. The person who triggers the reaction sets the tempo. They decide the emotional direction of the conversation. And the moment you rush to respond, you confirm their authority over the frame. This is why detachment feels unsettling to others. It breaks the rhythm they expect. Imagine a small confrontation. Someone says, "You've changed. You're acting distant lately." Most people respond immediately. "No, I'm not. I've just been busy. You're misunderstanding me." The explanation comes quickly because silence feels uncomfortable. But that explanation does something subtle. It accepts the accusation as the frame of the conversation. You are now defending a position someone else defined. The detached response is slower, not hostile, not defensive. You listen. You let the statement sit in the air. Then, calmly, maybe, nothing more. Now the frame is unstable. The person who made the accusation expected resistance or justification. Instead, they face ambiguity. And ambiguity forces them to reveal more of themselves. They begin to explain what they meant. They elaborate. They expose their assumptions. Without raising your voice or arguing your case, the dynamic has reversed. They are now the one trying to be understood. This is the deeper function of restraint. Silence creates space, and people rush to fill space with their own thoughts. In doing so, they often reveal more than they intended. The detached person understands this. You are not withholding words to manipulate the situation. You are withholding them to observe the situation more clearly. When you stop reacting immediately, you begin to see patterns most people miss. Who grows impatient? Who becomes aggressive? Who tries to provoke emotion? Who becomes uncomfortable when they cannot guide your response? These reactions are information. Most people move through conversations like actors following a script. A criticism appears, they defend. A compliment appears, they soften. A conflict appears, they escalate. But once you step outside that script, something interesting happens. The script stops working on you. And when the script fails, people reveal who they really are. Some will respect the calm. Others will try harder to provoke it. A few will become irritated by your composure because they relied on your emotional reactions to feel powerful. This is why detachment often attracts accusations. You're cold, you don't care, you think you're better than everyone. But these accusations rarely describe what you are doing. They describe what the other person is losing the ability to guide your emotional state. In social dynamics, control often hides inside emotional reactions. Whoever can trigger them can steer them. Detachment removes the steering wheel. And once people realize they cannot move you easily, something else begins to happen. They start watching you more carefully. Why does restraint create fascination? Because the human mind cannot tolerate unanswered questions. Most people reveal themselves too quickly. Their opinions appear immediately. Their emotions surface without delay. Their intentions are easy to read because they explain them constantly. This makes them comfortable to interact with, but psychologically invisible. Predictability reduces attention. The brain saves energy by ignoring what it already understands. When your reactions follow a familiar pattern, people stop studying you. They feel they have already solved the puzzle. Detachment interrupts that certainty. When your reactions are measured instead of automatic, people cannot map you easily. And once the mind encounters uncertainty, it begins searching for meaning. It replays conversations, it studies tone, it watches your expressions. You become psychologically expensive to ignore. Consider a simple social moment. Someone sends a message expecting an immediate reply. The typical pattern appears again and again. The phone buzzes. The response comes instantly. A short pause creates anxiety. Another message appears. Did you see this? This cycle trains people to expect constant availability, but the disciplined response is different. You read the message. You do not rush to answer. You respond later, clearly and calmly, without apology for the delay. Nothing aggressive, nothing defensive. Just a signal that your attention is not a reflex. The difference seems small, but the psychological effect is significant. Instead of controlling your rhythm, others must adapt to it. And adaptation is where respect begins. This principle appears everywhere. In meetings, the person who waits before speaking often commands more attention than the one who talks continuously. In relationships, the individual who maintains emotional balance becomes more compelling than the one who constantly seeks reassurance. This is not about playing games. It is about energy distribution. Attention is a limited resource. Most people spend it recklessly. They react to every opinion, every message, every minor conflict, as if it demands immediate resolution. Over time, this creates a pattern. Their emotional state becomes publicly accessible. Anyone can influence it. Detachment closes that door. You begin choosing which situations deserve your response and which do not. Some criticisms pass without comment. Some provocations dissolve in silence. Some conflicts are simply observed rather than entered. This selectivity changes perception. People begin associating your reactions with significance. If you rarely respond emotionally, the moments you do respond carry weight. Your words become signals rather than noise. That is the hidden advantage of restraint. When expression becomes rare, it becomes valuable. This is why the quiet individual often appears more confident than the one who constantly explains themselves. Silence suggests control, and control suggests depth. Whether that depth exists or not, at first, does not matter, because the practice of restraint gradually creates it. You start noticing details others overlook. Tone shifts, small contradictions, subtle attempts to provoke reactions. With every observation, your understanding sharpens, and eventually the most important shift occurs. You stop reacting in order to be understood. You start observing in order to understand others. Why do people try harder the moment you stop reacting? Because control seeks resistance. Many social interactions are not just conversations. They are quiet tests. Someone throws a subtle jab. Someone questions your decision. Someone pushes a boundary just far enough to see what happens next. Most people respond instantly because emotional reflex is fast. A criticism triggers defense. A challenge triggers argument. A rejection triggers pursuit. The reaction arrives before awareness, and the moment it appears, the test is complete. The other person now understands exactly where your emotional pressure points are. This is why detachment changes the game. When your reactions slow down, the test does not produce clear results. The person probing you does not get the emotional signal they expected. Instead of clarity, they encounter stillness. And stillness is difficult to interpret. Imagine a small provocation in a conversation. Someone says with a slight smile, "You always take things too seriously." The typical response comes quickly. "No, I don't. You're exaggerating. That's not fair." Now the discussion becomes a debate about personality. The frame has been accepted. The detached response is different. You look at them. You pause. Then you say calmly, "That's possible." And you move on. No defense, no irritation, no emotional spike. Suddenly the person who made the remark feels something unexpected. Without resistance, their statement has no friction. They are left alone with it. Often they begin explaining themselves, softening their tone, or even retracting the jab. The test dissolves. This is the strategic effect of emotional discipline. It prevents others from measuring you through reaction. When people cannot easily provoke you, they lose a common method of social control. But something else happens at the same time. People begin revealing more of themselves. When someone tries to provoke you repeatedly, they show impatience. When they try to guilt you into reacting, they show insecurity. When they escalate small conflicts, they show a need for dominance. These behaviors become visible only when you stop participating in the emotional rhythm they expect. The detached person is not passive. You are attentive. You notice patterns most individuals ignore because they are too busy defending themselves. And once you see those patterns, you gain an advantage that has nothing to do with aggression. You gain clarity. Clarity about who respects boundaries and who tests them. Clarity about who seeks understanding and who seeks control. Clarity about which interactions deserve your energy and which are simply noise. Most people cannot see these distinctions because they react too quickly. Detachment slows the moment down. That pause between stimulus and response becomes a space where perception grows sharper. Inside that space, you choose the tone, the timing, and sometimes the silence that follows. And when you begin choosing instead of reacting, your presence changes. People feel it before they understand it. Why does emotional independence make someone magnetic? Because most people are unconsciously negotiating for reassurance. Look closely at everyday behavior, and you will notice a quiet dependency running underneath it. People check reactions before forming opinions. They soften their boundaries to avoid tension. They explain themselves repeatedly to make sure they are still accepted. This constant calibration creates a subtle signal. Their stability depends on how others respond. And when people sense that dependency, something inside them relaxes. Not in respect, but in control. If your emotional balance relies on their approval, they hold influence over your behavior, whether they intend to or not. Detachment removes that leverage. The moment you stop adjusting yourself for acceptance, the dynamic shifts. Your mood is no longer negotiated. Your decisions no longer wait for validation. Instead of asking the room for permission, you move according to your own internal measure. This does not make you hostile, it makes you steady. Consider a familiar moment in relationships. One person becomes distant for a day. The typical reaction appears almost automatically. Messages multiply, questions follow. Did I do something wrong? Are you upset with me? The emotional pressure rises quickly because silence feels like a threat, but the disciplined response looks different. You notice the distance. You continue with your day. You allow space without rushing to close it. If communication returns, you engage calmly. If it does not, you observe without panic. The difference here is not indifference, it is self-command. Your emotional state is not dictated by temporary fluctuations in someone else's behavior. This composure creates something powerful, psychological gravity. People are drawn toward individuals who appear internally anchored. Not because they are perfect, but because their reactions are not easily manipulated by momentary approval or disapproval. Most environments contain constant emotional turbulence. Opinions shift, alliances change, small conflicts appear and disappear throughout the day. Someone who remains centered inside that turbulence begins to stand out. Their presence feels stable. Their responses feel measured. Their attention feels intentional rather than reactive. Over time, this stability creates trust even among those who do not fully understand it. Because beneath all social noise, human beings search for something simple: reliability. Not predictability of emotion, but predictability of character. Detachment cultivates that reliability. You do not explode under pressure. You do not collapse under criticism. You do not chase validation when it temporarily disappears. You remain consistent, and consistency creates authority without demanding it. This is why emotional independence often appears attractive, even intimidating. It signals that your sense of value does not fluctuate with the room. You are participating in the interaction, but you are not dependent on its outcome. You can connect without clinging. You can care without surrendering control. And once this balance appears in your behavior, another transformation begins to take shape. Because detachment does more than change how others see you. It changes how you see them. At a certain point, detachment stops being a tactic and becomes a perspective. You begin to notice how much of social life is driven by urgency that isn't real, messages that feel like emergencies but are only impatience, conflicts that feel serious but are only wounded pride, expectations that feel binding but were never truly yours. Most people move through these pressures automatically. They answer immediately. They defend quickly. They chase resolution, even when resolution was never required. This constant responsiveness drains authority from their presence. Because when every stimulus receives the same reaction, nothing you do appears deliberate. Your behavior becomes reflex instead of choice. Detachment restores choice. You start asking quieter questions before responding. Does this situation deserve my energy? Is this conflict meaningful or simply emotional noise? Is this relationship built on respect or on access to my reactions? These questions slow your participation in the endless cycle of emotional demands. And when you slow down, perception changes. You begin to see who respects silence and who panics in it, who listens carefully and who needs constant reassurance, who values your presence and who only values your availability. Detachment becomes a filter. The people who require immediate emotional responses often drift away when they realize they cannot control the rhythm anymore. Not because you rejected them, but because they depended on a version of you that reacted on command. The ones who remain behave differently. They approach with more clarity. Conversations become more direct. Boundaries are accepted rather than negotiated through pressure. The quality of interaction changes. This is why detachment is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look distant, but internally, it is simply alignment. Your actions match your values instead of matching other people's expectations. You stop trying to be everywhere. You stop explaining every silence. You stop offering emotional access to people who have not shown they can handle it with care. And the result is paradoxical. The less you chase connection, the more meaningful connection becomes. The less you react to every stimulus, the more weight your responses carry. The less you depend on approval, the more respect begins to appear around you. Not because you demanded it, because your behavior quietly redefined the terms. Detachment does not eliminate emotion. It places emotion under command. You still feel deeply, but those feelings move through discipline instead of impulse. Over time, this discipline becomes visible. People sense it in the way you listen longer before speaking, the way you remain composed during tension, the way you do not rush to prove yourself when challenged. It communicates something simple but powerful. Your center is not negotiable. And once that center is stable, something else becomes clear. Detachment was never about withdrawing from the world. It was about no longer surrendering yourself to it. The truth is simple once you see it. The moment you stop reacting on command, the game around you begins to change. There will be moments when the old instinct returns. Someone questions you, and the urge appears to explain everything. Someone misunderstands you, and you feel the pull to correct the story. Someone pushes your boundaries, and your mind searches for the perfect defense. That tension is real. The impulse to react is loud. But when you hold your silence for just a moment longer, something revealing happens. The other person keeps talking. Their tone shifts. Their assumptions surface. What began as pressure slowly exposes its own motive. This is the quiet power of restraint. You move from reacting to observing, from defending yourself to understanding the situation, from emotional noise to disciplined clarity. And once that shift happens, people begin to feel it in your presence. Not because you demand respect, but because your reactions are no longer negotiable. That is self-command. If this perspective resonated with you, subscribe and leave a short comment like silent strength or cold clarity. Because once you learn to hold your silence, the world stops pulling your strings.